Hi, welcome to Fireside Snack. Let's grab a snack and sit down to chat. We're Abby and Gabby, two recovery coaches eager to share our lived and professional experience in the world of mental health and eating disorders. In our time together, we hope to grab a bite to eat and connect with ourselves and each other. Our hope with this podcast is to inspire you to take care of yourself by building a life you don't want to run away from. As a disclaimer, the information shared in this podcast is based on the personal experiences of Abby and Gabby and is intended for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you are seeking support or have concerns about your mental health, please consult with a licensed professional. Enjoy your fireside snack.
Hello and welcome back to Fireside Snack. It's so good to see you again this week. I'm Abby.
And I'm Gabby. Nice to see everybody again, or welcome to those of y'all who are joining for the first time. Abby, what are we doing here? What is this place that we're in?
Absolutely. We're a weekly podcast talking about all things recovery from people who are in it ourselves and also work in the field. We'll be excited to sit with you each week, have a snack, and just share space. On the topic of snacks, Gabby, what is our plan for today? What do we have?
Today for snack, I've got some mochi. So basically, if you haven't heard of mochi, it's like this dough-covered ice cream. So mine is cookies and cream, and it's really good. If you're like, I don't know, I'm very like texture sensitive, and so it's something that like really does well for me. And then I've also got my Doc Pop Poppy again. Thank you. What about you, Abby? What are you having for a snack?
I'm feeling a theme. I love it. Today, I need something sweet. It's cold. It's snowy. Not typical for my area. So just feeling a little bit of comfort. I made some cookies. I have chocolate chip and sugar and a spare sitting next to me in case I need another. And then some water. So I'm excited for snack today.
You made these cookies.
Okay, made out of, like, taken out of the package, put it on the tray, put it in the oven.
You assembled the cookies. You assembled them onto a plate.
Yeah, I didn't. The whole from scratch thing is wonderful for people. I just don't have the talents required.
Or the time. You are so busy. I just want to call out something that I may or may not get put on blast for. Last episode, I said, I've never had a Luna bar. I'm going to bring one for the next episode. I was at the grocery store today. I had my list. I'm rocking out. I'm doing me. And I forgot it. I completely forgot the Luna bar. So next time, I will be doing a taste test of the Luna bar. But for now, we've got this delicious mochi. We'll talk about our next thing, which is how did we come up with the name Fireside Snack? So I was in the car with my mom, and she was like, what does that name mean? Like, why did you guys name it that? So I'm curious, Abby, if we want to go into a little bit about the history of Fireside Snack.
Absolutely. And I think it's so... We hit everything under the sun, I feel like, last episode, except for where the name came from this podcast. So,
Yep.
You know, big gap there. So excited we can talk about it today. And the snack part, which we just talked about, I think we play right into. We want to have snack. We want this to be a communal space for support. Having a peer or someone else be able to have a snack with you can be really helpful. You're not doing it alone. So we are here as those pals, as those people. And the Fireside Snack, I'm excited about. I think we talk about, oh, Gabby, history eludes me, names.
So this is where I come in, because Abby and I were kind of like throwing out names. Before we did the podcast, we definitely had like a couple of meetings of like, is this something we want to do? Is this what we're about? And I thought of the name. Abby had the idea of having snack during the podcast, which I thought was amazing, awesome. And then I was like, what if we do Fireside Snack? Like, you know, when I think it was FDR, he would basically do the fireside chats, or he would like address America, talk about what's going on, talk about his thoughts on things. And so Fireside Snack is kind of a play on that. So we're sitting, we're chatting, we're talking about ourselves, but we're also having snack and hanging out. So that's where the name comes from.
I love it. Okay, so we've been at this for a week, and I think we've learned some things already. We had some unique experiences in the past week. I think one that we want to touch on, and one is if you watch this video through YouTube or the one last week, you may notice something different this time around, and that's an age requirement. Gabby, I know you got the email. I'm curious if you can share a little bit, like, what is going on.
So basically, we posted the podcast on Thursday. Friday morning, first thing I wake up to is a YouTube email in my inbox, basically saying that our podcast was flagged for mature content and that it would need to have an age restriction on the video. So basically what that means is if you're under the age of 18, you're not able to watch our video. We encourage you to watch it with a parent or guardian or somebody above the age of 18 who you trust and who can kind of check in with you about it. But otherwise, you just sign into your YouTube and you're able to watch the video. What ended up happening was, I'm pretty sure, I'm not going to act like I know what's going on behind the scenes at YouTube because, one, I couldn't get a hold of anybody there. There's like no tech team, no tech support, which was really fun for a first-time creator. But two, we got flagged for the self-harm policy, which is a pretty intensive policy that they have. It encompasses multiple things, and I almost feel like by saying those things, we're going to get flagged, so here I go. It includes self-harm, suicidal ideation, and eating disorders, right? It basically encompasses all kinds of things, including giving people instructions for how to do these things, glorifying these things. Abby had a great point before the podcast came on that her mom brought to her of, back when we were sick, we would look at similar videos to this one or listen to people in their recovery stories or listen to people on their journey with their ED. And we would almost utilize those as resources for ourselves for our eating disorders. So we understand the age requirement. We understand the restriction. We're not super thrilled about it as we believe that people sharing these stories is what is influential and providing hope and honesty and transparency. And this is the predicament we're in right now. If you do not like the age requirements, we're also available on Spotify. We're looking at some other options in the event that we continue to come up against different obstacles with YouTube. So be on the lookout for more information, but we'll definitely be keeping everybody up to date with what shakes out with that.
Thanks for walking us through it, Gabby. And I think what you mentioned about it's kind of seeing it from both sides. Like, we really feel it's important as information for everyone to get to hear. And there were times I needed to be protected by a social media platform and I wasn't. And I saw things that were really harmful. I sought out certain things on platforms. And I don't feel like Gabby and I are perpetuating harm in any way, shape, or form. And I'm grateful in a roundabout way that somehow we have some protections in place. So if you see the age restrictions, that's what's going on. Like Gabby said, Spotify is available, but regardless, we're super glad to have you with us today.
Absolutely. First time welcome. People who are joining us again, welcome back. Today, our topic is kind of talking about what is recovery. There's a lot of different terminology that goes into recovery. You hear all kinds of acronyms and all these different stages and all kinds of different things. So really what we're going to talk about today is what is recovery? What's the difference between like recovering, being in recovery, being recovered? We have a lot of different talking points that we're going to go through today. The first one that I think would be important to discuss on a personal level is, Abby, like, what does recovery mean to you as an individual? And then maybe we can talk about some, like, textbook definitions of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important to check in on different people's definitions of things. I've learned over time and like sessions that I've had with different clients, with people in my life, that we can define things so differently. For me, recovery is pretty synonymous with freedom. It is a lot with doing not being bound by things, by being able to express myself openly, not being like constrained or stuck in a certain viewpoint. So I'm in recovery from multiple things, but from an eating disorder, it's freedom from having to follow diet culture, from monitoring my food shape or weight, and really just giving myself the ability to be me unencumbered by those extra rules. Gabby, what are your takes on recovery? What does that word mean for you?
Yeah, I know a lot of people like to use the word recovered. If you're not acting on everyday behaviors, people like to utilize that term. If you've been abstaining from those behaviors from a long time, people will sometimes say that you're recovered. I always use the term I'm in recovery. I feel like for me, recovery is a daily practice where I am presented with all of these choices before me. And being in recovery means being able to have my wise mind turned on to be able to have access to all of those choices. I like that you phrased it as freedom because I think choices are freedom. And I think that's what really motivates me. I think it's also for me getting back to basics. I think we talked about this a little bit last episode, but there's so many layers to things. And even in the eating disorder, there's so many layers, right? There's like our relationship with food, our relationship with our bodies, our relationship with diet culture. Like there's so many different layers. And for me, recovery means getting back to basics and finding out what my voice is outside of all of these voices that I've been told throughout my entire life. Who am I in all of this? And what are the values that guide me and make me want to live the life that I want to live? Because I'm also a full-hearted believer that some people will utilize substances, some people will utilize different mental health conditions, and they don't want to quit. They have no interest in recovery. That's not what they want to do. Their life is more of a harm reductionist life, and I think that's okay too. But for me, my recovery is being guided by my values, being able to make choices based on those and having a clear idea of what they are.
I really love that, especially the language piece, recovery, recovered. It can be so complicated, and I think it makes it confusing for people just coming into a recovery space, or if you've never been around mental health in any way, shape, or form talking about recovery. There's a gradient that recovery is. It's not a black or white, a yes or no, and that can be really complicated. And it comes the same way with the language that we use in recovery, recovered. I also say in recovery, the term practice comes to mind. Like I practice recovery just like I would practice any other skills. I also am always aware that I can choose to not use wise behaviors. And so I'm actively choosing recovered behaviors instead. And that has gotten easier over time, a lot more automatic. And I think for me, continuing the language of in recovery is a reminder of that steps that I take.
Absolutely. I think that's a great, I like the idea of calling it a practice because it does, I think like sometimes there's this misconception that like once you get into recovery or you start recovering, you see this like bright light in your brain. You're like, I'm not going to use behaviors anymore. Like the world is so much clearer and everything makes sense. It doesn't. Like I remember being in recovery and you have now, instead of, I think it's more so like having a buffet instead of just having like somebody give you food and that's your option.
Beautiful example.
Like, I feel like my whole life when I was in my eating disorder, I was doing choices that were presented to me by the world at large. Whether I read it online, saw it in a TV show, picked up on behaviors from different people around me. And when I became in recovery, I feel like I now had all of these other meals and behaviors and things that I could pick from and choose to do. And I think that's almost what's the most difficult, at least for me, is that the behavior isn't now just gone, right? And I think the big one, once you pursued recovery, what did that look like for you? What did it feel like pursuing recovery on the real, like for the real time? Because I guarantee you and I have both recovered, nudge, nudge, right? But we probably both recovered tens of times. Yeah. But when you actually decided to pursue it and stick with it, what was the most difficult thing for you? What was easiest for you? Yeah.
For me, it was, I just wanted it to go away. I was tired of it, right? When I finally got to the point where I rejected the eating disorder, I was no longer wanting to participate in the behaviors. I had other skills I wanted to use, other connections that I wanted to rely on, and yet I still had urges. I still had these thoughts. I still got stuck and I had anxiety about similar things. And it was the frustration that like, I'm ready to let it go. Why isn't it leaving me? And took time, and that's where I think recovery can be so delicate. Navigating, is this a slip? Is this me investing more in my eating disorder? Is this a moment of confusion? Is this a pattern? There are a lot of, you said earlier, layers to all of that that can make recovery, the unknown, scary. And so having these conversations, talking a little bit about what it's like to journey into recovery, what that process was like for us, I needed that from somebody, to hear that it's not that I'm doing recovery wrong if I'm feeling confused. If I'm thinking, oh my gosh, am I in recovery? Am I not in recovery? I can't tell anymore. And it doesn't mean that I was doing things wrong. And I'm, speaking to the wide audience of Earth out there. It doesn't mean that you're doing things wrong. There's a lot of variables at play here. So I really am grateful, Gabby, that we can bring this to the podcast today and just start to have honest conversations about what recovery is. There's a lot of different elements to it, and discuss what that was like for us, at least.
Yeah, I'm curious because I'm kind of going to pivot us a little bit because we're talking about recovery. I feel like something that's important to mention is why people don't recover, or what are things that stop people from being able to pursue recovery. I know, and I'll speak to this a little bit more, but I want to ask you, Abby, I know, like, from my experience as a recovery coach, right, I was taught that people are not willing, not ready, not able. And I'll go into a little bit about what each of those definitions mean. But I'm curious, when you found yourself hitting a wall where you were like, I want to recover and I cannot, or I want to recover and X, Y, and Z is coming up that's stopping me. What was that experience like for you? What would you say was holding you up from being able to pursue full recovery?
Oof, solid question.
You're like, I wasn't expecting that one. Here we go.
We're diving into it, folks. No, and I mentioned in the last episode going through so many different periods on my way to where I'm at now, some of which I had zero interest in recovery. I was really more comfortable in my eating disorder, or I didn't ever think that it was going to be possible for me to let go fully. I think self-doubt, like fear of failure, was a big thing that held me back, because the eating disorder was predictable. Whether the outcomes were positive or not, I knew what things would look like. I knew what things would feel like. I knew what my response would be. So the unknown and that uncertainty, the lack of self-confidence that I had in my ability to keep myself safe, was a big hindrance. And it took trial and error to break through that wall. But it was, I think, if you're talking about like ready, there are plenty of times where I didn't think it was a big enough deal. I didn't have that acknowledgement of my like self to say, okay, this is a problem. We're concerned, hearing that, and the like denial, me for a long time. I wasn't ready. And there were times I really wanted it, and I could not seem to break the pattern. I was really used to doing things a certain way, and it took a long time to give myself enough space from behaviors to do something different. So, gosh, I mean, I could talk a lot about the different things that made it tricky. And it was that like persistence for me, which is a lot easier said than done, that broke me through that wall. But the wall is real, and I think it's important to talk about. Gabby, I know you said you had like some definitions and points on that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I feel like I've hit almost every single one of the ones that I talked about, like not willing, totally, 100% of the time. Everybody else, it's kind of like, it reminds me of like an intervention where everybody comes and they're like, we are very concerned for you. And you're like, why, girl? Like, I'm just chilling. I'm just doing me. I'm fine. I have this under control. So not willing, not ready, for sure. There's always also this idea of like, my eating disorder is not that bad. I don't look like X, Y, and Z, and so my eating disorder is not that bad, which is a bananas concept when we start thinking about it, as I'm such a firm believer that there's no, like, despite physical symptoms, despite mental health symptoms, there's no hierarchy of who has it worse. We're all sick when we have an eating disorder.
Preach.
I think another one is like not able to. There were some periods of my life where the circumstances were not conducive for me to recover. So basically, I feel like that could look like a multitude of things. It could look like, for me, it was one of my my best friends at the time, she also had an eating disorder. And so it was impossible to not engage in behaviors when I was surrounding myself so closely with somebody who was deeply, deeply sick. I think another thing is not having like money or resources for support. I think I talked about this last episode, but I didn't start going to therapy until I was 21, 22. I didn't know the resources. I didn't have the money to go and pay out of pocket. I was a young kid. And I had also, in full transparency, I had had some really big rubs with the mental health field as a child. I remember my mom had signed me up for therapy, and it ended up exploding into something that I didn't trust the therapist anymore. I didn't feel like she had my best interest at heart, and so I kind of wrote therapy off for a really long time. So I think those are, like, whenever I was trained as a recovery coach, those were the three big ones that we kind of hit on: the not willing, not ready, not able. I feel like not ready is also more so like, I still feel like this behavior has value. I still think the eating disorder has value, and I don't think I'm going to be able to handle life without it.
I'm really glad that you brought up resources. And I think this is one of the reasons I'm grateful we're doing this together. I come from a different background of getting into treatment, and a part of that is just really, frankly, honestly, privilege. I've been very privileged in my treatment experience, and that is not the case for most people who have an eating disorder. There's an organization I will give a shout out because I personally love them. Gabby didn't even clear this with you, but Project Heal. They do, like a lot of work around barriers to accessing care around eating disorders. That can be economic. There are racial barriers, sexuality. There's a lot of different things that go into this. And I think it's important, like, my experience of coming into treatment is not everyone's. And so some of the things that I jumped into come from a place of, like, I was able to get that care in a different way than is available to some. And Gabby, I appreciate you being willing to share that, because that's an experience for so many. And it's an important, I think when you talk about recovery, so many of us talk about treatment, and that's not, like, formalized treatment isn't required, and yet it's a big part of the conversation. So I'm glad that you brought that up in the way you did, because it's important to, I think, to draw attention on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things in my life that was helpful to me, we talked about earlier, what was the thing that kind of stopped you from being able to recover? What was the obstacle for you? And I would say for me, like, a big obstacle too was not trusting the system, like not thinking that the people who were there to help me cared about me. And unfortunately, you and I have both worked in this field, and you and I are both people that when we go to work, we put our heart on our sleeve and we give our all, and we really show up for people, or at least that's our intention. And if we ever falter on that, we repair it. But that's not how it is everywhere, and that's not how all providers are. And I think what's hard and what's difficult is people utilize these resources for help, and they want this help so badly and so deeply, and then they get re-traumatized, and then they fall deeper into their eating disorder, or they fall deeper into behaviors. I think there's so many instances where people try and go the correct avenue of what society teaches us is the way to recovery, and I think a lot of people end up in a worse spot because of it. So I think that's also important to note too, is like, there's no one way to recover. There's no one pathway to recover. You might start on one pathway and change to a different one, or realize it's not right for you. So I'm really glad that you brought the privilege up, Abby. I think it's a really good point.
Yeah. Treatment is a tool to help on your journey to recovery. It is not the gateway. It is not the gateway. And this is from someone who is like over treatmented, not a word, but follow with me, right? Years just sitting in it. It's not the gateway. It can be a helpful tool. Sometimes it's not, and it's unfortunate, right? There's a lot to it. I won't dig. Just so many different aspects to it, but know that it's a wonderful tool, and it's not the gateway. It's not that you can't access recovery if you can't have formal treatment, and it's okay to have feelings about that. There's a lot at play there. I threw you right into that, Gabby. Thank you for jumping into that. But I felt that was important to touch on.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question because I think to recover you also need support. I think that would be a good second segue to talk about is how do we introduce recovery to our friends, family, acquaintances? What does that look like, and how do we get support while also setting boundaries? Because I feel like a big trap that people fall into, especially I would say I've noticed this a lot in like romantic partnerships that I've seen, is one person is in recovery and they're pursuing recovery and they tag in their partner for support. And then partner ends up feeling like they're, you know, the momager or the dad who's hovering and trying to enforce and trying to get them to do X, Y, and Z. And so, Abby, do you have any like tidbits or insight into how do we set people up for success when they're in recovery and wanting support from the outside world?
It's such a good question. Recovery doesn't disappear in relationships. Gabby, I think you gave an example last time of how even the eating disorder may change depending on relationships. That also can apply to recovery. And it can be hard. Communication is key and complicated. It's not as simple as like, hey, I want your support, like poof. And it's wonderful, and all the love in the world may not make it feel easy. But having an honest conversation, not only that like, hey, I need your support, but this is where I don't need that right now. And I think having very explicit conversations of, hey, I need you to check in with me and see, is there anything I can do for you at this mealtime? I don't need you to try to ask me to do something I've said no to. So being explicit about the kind of support that would be helpful. I think also providing a resource, if you're able to link to, there's a lot of free like caregiver and loved one support groups, taking some of the burden of education and ways to support off you. It can be draining if you're going through the recovery process to explain to your loved one why something matters or why you need something. And it also gives them a space to get support from other people who are getting the same experience. So communication, saying not only what we want, but also what we don't up front. Those are my 2 cents. Gabby, what are your thoughts?
Incredible, Abby. I think those are hitting the nail on the head. I truly do think that people can't read your mind. I think, for example, something that might be really helpful to me is like, hey, can you check in and make sure that I have had dinner? Something that's not helpful for me is when you coach me bite for bite. Come on, Gabby girl, why don't you have another bite? Don't do that. I won't like it. I'm not going to have a good time. And so I think, like you said, Abby, being very explicit with that, I think another thing that's important to understand when you're incorporating outside supports is to really differentiate your eating disorder from you.
Ooh, such a good point, Gabby. Tell me more. I need to hear this. This is such a good point.
Da-da-da-da! I've got something in the oven and it's cooking up. Okay, I think the biggest fallacy that people fall into is they want support so badly and then somebody gives it to them and they're frustrated by it. So what's coming to mind for me right now is I've seen folks who incorporate their husbands, wives, mothers, fathers in, and they're like, I really need their support and like I really need their help, like making sure that I have my 3 meals, 2 snacks for the day. I really need some accountability with that stuff. And then I'm going to flip out when they ask me if I've had dinner. I think that's a really big one of like, why are you being so annoying? Like, why are you riding me? Well, because you asked me to. Because I'm trying to support you. I think it's also more than okay to recognize that you're frustrated that you have to be in recovery. You're not frustrated at the person who's trying to help you recover. And I tell people this all the time. You can be mad and frustrated while in recovery and you're still recovering if you're doing the next recovery thing. You can be frustrated about things that you ask for and need help with too. I think that's a big thing, as well as getting very familiar with if you're having a big reaction to something or some support that somebody's giving you, taking a deep, hard look at why you are feeling that way. Is it really that your mom is just like out to get you and won't leave you alone? Or is it that you're frustrated that you have to do hard things and choose a different path?
I think one more tidbit I want to throw out here is to set a time to talk about these things instead of it being reactionary conversations. That's the time it comes on our minds so much, is gosh, why do we keep going around like this? But there's never any time outside of the heat of the moment to have the conversations in a safer way. So even if that means that every third Monday you have a phone call with a friend to talk about what's helpful and what's not, it's important, in my opinion, to do so outside of the heat of the moment when there's more at play than just the relationship and support that you want to share with one another.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of the acronyms for stop and halt and those kinds of things. Are you going to say it, Abby? Or do you know them? Do you know
I'm
them?
DBT queen. Stop.
Yes, tell me.
Take a step back. Observe. Proceed mindfully. This is my top DBT skill. This DBT skill has brought me out of fires. We're going to stop. We're going to take a step back. We're going to observe not just others and the things that I think they're doing wrong, but also myself. Also what my day was like beforehand, what my sleep's been like. And then I'm going to proceed mindfully knowing that information. And then halt feeds right into it. Part of that observe. Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? All of those things can change how we perceive situations, and even the best intentions can get lost when there's more at play. So I love a stop skill. I'll talk about stop skills all day long. I could probably dedicate an episode to stop skills, but a wonderful example of using that here, Gabby.
Anything else that feels relevant to bringing in supports, to having people have your back while you're on this journey?
So I think it actually something that I do with my clients every week that's important to bring into the support equation is to not have it all be recovery oriented, not have it all be focused on the eating disorder. Like, make some space for you. An assignment I give people all the time is go be a human this week. What are you doing to make sure that, like, Abigail is Abigail, not just I'm fighting for recovery? It's so important to have that passion, and we need to refill our cups. And that's the same thing in relationships, providing some space if there's neutral activities, or just having like a set aside time to have nothing to do with the eating disorder, recovery, or other responsibilities, and just nurture the relationship on its own. Because it can get convoluted. Maybe some responsibility shifts happen, but it's important to, you're not an eating disorder. Those things are two separate things. And your relationship is not eating disorder versus non-eating disorder person trying to make it stop. It's not that like clear cut. There's separate identities there. So it's important to nurture both.
I love that. I love that so much. Whenever I talk with people, I'm like, you have to have a life that you want to recover for, or else what are we doing here? And I remember when I first, this is unfortunate to say, and it's also the truth. My eating disorder consumed everything. I didn't have hobbies. I didn't have like fun little things that I was getting up to. I wasn't like doing punch needle. I wasn't doing needle
you weren't
point.
doing it. Yeah, obviously, Gabby.
I wouldn't know. I don't even know the name of it because I wasn't doing it. And so I remember when I was in my therapist's office, for my first therapist ever, when I was like 22, and she was like, what do you like to do for fun? And I was like, have an eating disorder and party. Like, I don't know, what did most kids like to do? But I had been in college, I had been an adolescent, I had no idea what stuff I liked. And I remember her telling me, she was like, what did you like to do when you were little? And I had this whole gamut of stuff. I was like, I loved playing video games. I used to love reading books. Or I used to paint and do art and write and journal and make my own little newspapers. And she was like, why did you stop doing those things? And I was like, I don't know. They just felt like silly little things that I did as a kid that you're supposed to grow out of. And she was like, no, that's your bliss. That's your joy. That's what makes you happy. And I started incorporating all of those things. Something I really dig, and like one episode I'll do a whole walkthrough of them, is I love doing diamond art, right? It's like a mindless thing that I just put my podcasts on. I sit down. I'll do it for like hours. I'll do it all day. And, I'm not going to go sell my diamond art to MoMA and ask to hang it up there. And it brings me so much joy and happiness to engage in those kinds of things. So I love that you talked about, like, you are not just the eating disorder, because you are so much more. Even though your whole life might be absorbed by this thing, it doesn't have to be forever. And you have so much more dimension and fullness. And yeah, I think that's just awesome. Abby, what are some of the things that you started being able to do once you were in recovery? Like, because you got so much time now when you're not acting on behaviors, you're like, wow, my calendar is open, you know? So what stuff did you learn to incorporate, or what was that experience like for you?
I enjoyed school again, and I've always been a school person, but my eating disorder made it about perfection. It was like a high stakes Russian roulette. What's going to happen if I don't get what I think I should get? What am I going to have to do? And I regained my love of learning just for fun. I have like random Google Docs about ladybugs and different like wood finishes for housing. Random stuff, but I like learning. And so I gained that back again, and it's fun, and I'm in school and I get to do research, and all of that is reconnecting with that inquisitive spirit. Gabby, I had a similar exploration journey for you that I was asked, what did you like to do as a kid? I was like, I rolled around in the dirt, looked at things and asked questions. And I played and I was silly. And I laid on the couch with my legs in the air, and they said I was like a cat, right? And then what is it like to do that? What is it like to find that joy again? It's a powerful experience. And I think I mentioned this last time, but to laugh and whoa, that felt good. That was important. Lots of things.
I feel like something that has also been giving me life and has been able to open up with my recovery journey is I am not masking anymore. So when you were just talking about how school became a perfectionism thing for you, I mean, gifted and talented program, right? That was me when I was growing up. I was in all the honors classes, wanted to be the top of my class. So that perfectionism is also the perfectionism of my eating disorder. It's also very people-pleasing. I think for me, what I have discovered is one of my leading values is authenticity. I can go into a place in a space and I can smell if you're bullshitting or if you're not being true. And that's one of the things that I am guided by. And so I show up very raw, goofy, expressive. And that's something that I hid for a very, very long time, or I only presented it in a way that was nice and clean cut and able to be digested easily by other people. And so I was always being a chameleon to the people who I was around is something that I took for granted for a very long time. And when I put the eating disorder down, I was then able to put my mask of people pleasing down slowly. That one took me a lot longer to figure out, and because that one's a little bit sneaky in how it shows up, but just so much more space also to be me.
So I have a couple more questions that I think would be important for us to hit on today. And I think we've talked around it a little bit, but I want to ask specifically, what were some of the things that you needed to hear at the start of your recovery journey?
Oof.
It's an oofus. That's the kind of question. Yeah.
Oofta indeed. I think there was a lot that I needed to hear. It's interesting that we're talking about this because I had a really good Skype call last night with one of my mentors, and I was telling him how grateful I was for his experience, but also how much he challenged me. So this is what I'll say, and it's answering your question, but it's also kind of a not answer. I feel like with my eating disorder, I was given a blueprint of who I was as a person, right? And what I needed were mentors and people around me who loved and cared about me, who saw the good in me when I didn't see it in myself, who would challenge my beliefs about myself or the world. So I remember talking to my mentor last night, and he was like, Yeah, I was always challenging you. I was always reframing things, playing the devil's advocate. And I was like, I needed that though, because I was so off kilter that I needed to be reframed so hard, so many times to be able to have my head screwed on straight and like figure out who I am and what my values are. Because I felt like for so long, people say things and they just don't really sink in with you. Or people say things and they think they're helpful things to say, and then they're actually harmful things to say, like, wow, I can't believe somebody like you has an eating disorder. And it's like, don't know why we felt the need to say that at all. I think what I needed to hear was, it's not going to look perfect. Your recovery journey is not going to look perfect. You are going to make mistakes, and this is the place to do it, because otherwise you're just trapped in the cycle of the eating disorder. I think another thing I needed to hear was that I wasn't an awful person. And like have somebody who knew me well be able to tell me that I am not horrible. All of the repertoire in my head of insults that I had either been called in my life or had been, made to feel. I think just I really had to believe that I was a person trying my best with good intentions who deserved more than what I was giving myself. Mm. And I did not believe that for a very long time. I thought for most of my life that I was a bad person pretending to be a good person. And that just wasn't it. I'm curious your thoughts, Abby. What did you need to hear? What was impactful to you during that time? Because I feel like people try and say a lot of things. It'll be okay. And you're like, well, it's not okay. So now what? Or like, it'll get better. Okay, but it's not better. So that doesn't help me. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah. So it's similar, Gabby, to what you said, but some of the things that I did were trauma responses, and I needed to learn that every time my fight, flight, or freeze response was queued up doesn't mean that I'm in a traumatic situation again and it's safe to choose better things for myself. So, I mean, that's a bundle and a half. There's a lot there, but a big part of it was me needed to hear that just the fight, flight, or freeze is real. What you're feeling is real. And it doesn't mean that we're in danger right now. It's responding to historical situations. It's okay to believe you're safe. The other thing is that discomfort isn't bad. It's not inherently bad. It's not just because I'm uncomfortable doesn't mean something's wrong. And it sounds a little bit counterintuitive. There are plenty of things that if it's uncomfortable, it's a sign. Maybe we should look into something different. And everything about recovery for me was uncomfortable. And so I had to be able to sit with, I feel uncomfortable. So hearing repeatedly that, yeah, you're uncomfortable. That makes sense. That's okay. That's not indicative of like, let's turn around. It's just, we're going to have to sit with it for a minute. And the last thing is that excitement and fear feel similar. I had such a hardwired response to fear that excitement seemed poisonous. I get excited about something and like immediately clawing myself back from it. Oh, that's a danger zone. And part of that is believing that I'm worth something more, but also being able to pause myself and go, oh, am I fearful? Am I anxious? Am I doubting? Am I excited? So giving myself permission to explore and the go ahead to say, okay, just because you feel this feeling does not mean it's doomsday. Let's pause. Are you excited? Whoa. Yeah. New thing. Are you excited? So those were some important lessons, but also statements for myself.
I can remember when my therapist sent me the feelings wheel, and I was like, I can feel all of these things? When did you know that you were in recovery? And like, how did you know that you were in recovery as opposed to just not acting on behaviors or having a break in your ED?
I had really strong feelings about the word recovery. I think part of it is I had claimed it when I didn't really believe it. And then when I started to enter into this part of recovery that I'm at now, I was petrified. If I say the word recovery, I'm going to jinx it. So it was so unclear to me that I avoided it altogether. Eventually, it was the recognition that I was my own distinct entity and my eating disorder was something else. That I had created space between myself and my eating disorder. For me, there was a lot of enmeshment. What's me? What's my eating disorder? A lot of identity exploration there. So at the time when I knew that I was something other than my eating disorder, I was able to claim that word for myself of in recovery. I'm very passionate about the in recovery part at that time as well, because I'm like, it's new. Everyone please, we're figuring this out. There's going to be some bumps, but I finally let myself at that point be bold enough to use the word recovery, because for me it was really scary, and because there wasn't that clear definition, I felt uncertain. So it really took, I think, me seeing a distinct divide between myself and my eating disorder before I really claimed it. It's interesting. It's so interesting, the different points we come into that. Gabby, when was that point for you?
I love your definition of it because I think that's so true. And up until very recently, I didn't even think about the fact that there is somebody separate. It felt so intertwined. It felt like I was it and it was me. And there was this eating disorder that was, acting on my behalf. For me, the biggest moment was when I finally took accountability for what was going on with me. I think for a very large part of my life, I felt like life was happening to me. And so it felt like, I remember being like, why is the world so hard? Or like, why does the universe keep, dumping on me? Why do bad things keep happening to me? And I realized I was also, though, making decisions not in my values and being very reactionary. And so I was kind of perpetuating my own stuck. I was really blaming a lot of my issues on my childhood or society. And yes, those things have played a huge role in why people have eating disorders, and they're significant and they impact us, and those things can lead to different kinds of conditions. And I have a choice. I had choices and I was continuing to make the same one and expect different results. And so I think the moment that I was like, my life is really hard, the eating disorder is really hard, and I continue to keep doing the same things over and over again and expect them to be easy or happy or better. I think when I knew I was in recovery I was like, I have a choice of how I want to live my life. I did not feel like I had a choice before. I felt like things were happening to me. Now I have agency, now I have power, and now I can do something differently.
I love that, especially the conversation around accountability. And if we don't believe we're in control, we can't change it. And being able to claim that, and that being such a pivotal shift. I beautifully said. And Gabby, I also know we've hit a lot of points during this episode. I'm excited about where we went, but we've been on a journey, as we expect to take everyone each week. If you had takeaways from people, it's a big topic, what is recovery, for people to take away from our episode today. Again, I'm lobbing the heavy questions at you. What would you want people to take away?
I would say the biggest one is, it's never too late to get started. There is no one way to do it, and there's no way to define your recovery or for it to look. And it's also not linear. You don't just go from being sick to recovered. For me, it looked like I'm sick and I'm in recovery, and then I'm sick again, and then I'm here, and then I'm there, and then I'm all over the place. And so I think really recognizing that this recovery is your journey. And as much as me and Abby talk about ours, as much as you read books about other people and theirs, yours is going to look different. And it's going to be personal to you. And that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means that you're finding yourself and finding your way out of it. What about you, Abby?
So if you're worried about if you're in recovery, you're in a good place. And part of that is because you're caring about where you're at, what you're doing, and what those steps mean for you. So Gabby and I have not produced a clear-cut answer on what does it mean to be in recovery? What's the sign that you're in recovery? But if you're sitting there wondering, oh gosh, am I? It's a good place to be. Not that it's a comfortable place. Like I said, discomfort isn't always bad, but it's a good sign. And then also really just highlighting what Gabby said, it's never too late. There are all different stages of recovery. Being in different stages at different times isn't a fault or a flaw. It's a journey. And regardless, we're really glad that journey has brought you here. So thank you so much for joining our episode today. Really excited to see you again next week. I don't even know what our topic's going to be, Gabby, but I know we're going to be here.
No, similar to recovery, you don't know what's ahead for you. You can have an inkling of what's going to come, but you don't know what's next. And that's kind of what we like to do with our podcast as well. We want it to be real. We want it to be authentic. We want it to be about topics that we're passionate about and are relevant to us that day. So please feel free, if you have questions for us about anything, you can reach out to us on firesidesnack@gmail.com. We're coming out with weekly episodes. We're finishing our snacks. So please stay tuned. Follow us on social media. And we look forward to seeing you again for a Fireside Snack.
Have a good one, y'all.
Fireside Snack is hosted by Abby Dinges and Gabby Buckner. Editing, music, and artwork by Gabby Buckner. Please email us at firesidesnack@gmail.com with your recovery questions and be on the lookout for weekly episodes. Thank you for joining us for Fireside Snack and for filling our cups up with gratitude. Enjoy your week.